Good morning. Mazda's four-door coupe with rear doors that opened against the wind first saw the light of day in the form of the RX-8 prototype in 1999. Despite the completely different front end than the production RX-8, it was clearly visible what the Japanese were preparing. However, this car, and therefore the production model, may not have been created at all, because the idea for a new sports model with a rotary engine could have died in the mid-1990s. In 1995, Mazda showed the RX-01 prototype. Although it did not resemble the RX-8 at all, if only because of its more traditional bodywork, it had something important under the hood. A naturally aspirated 13B- MSP multi-sideport engine, which, after modifications and taking on the trade name Renesis, eventually found its way into the hero of today's article. Work on the Mazda RX-01 was not continued, among other things due to the brand's not-so-good financial condition, but a group of engineers decided to work on the engine. When they tested its subsequent versions in a modified Mazda MX-5, decision-makers found out about everything and pushed the matter forward. When the RX-EVOLV prototype debuted, the power unit also had its new name, Renesis. It was also retained in the production RX-8, but before this model actually went into production in 2003, it was preceded by another concept in 2001. This one did not differ much from the production car. With the historical outline behind us, it's time to tackle what you came here for. As usual, we'll start with: fortunately, there is not much bad to say about the electrical system and electronics. Of course, the RX-8 is no longer a particularly fresh car, but the most fragile elements in these categories include the heated front seats in early models and faulty coolant level sensors. The problem with the latter is that they are integrated with fluid tanks, so you can't buy just the sensor. Either in the event of a failure, i.e., when the low fluid level indicator lights up but the fluid is actually there and fine, you buy the entire tank, or you unplug the plug and often check the fluid level yourself. As for the bodywork, we have the subject of corrosion, although in this matter there is a situation where one rabbi will say yes, another will say no. The most susceptible to corrosion are early RX-8s, as well as cars that have driven on roads sprinkled with salt or spent their lives by the sea. Rust can lurk practically anywhere, on the fenders, sills, windows, including around the windscreen, in the undercarriage, on the boot floor, on the exhaust system. Cars that have undergone visual tuning should be examined particularly carefully. It often happens that their styling packages hide unpleasant surprises. It is also worth examining the rims carefully. It should be noted that the bodies of some cars from 2003 to 2006 were made of too low-quality steel, which leads to the rapid development of rusty efflorescence. Cars from these years should be examined especially carefully. Some versions were equipped with aluminum body elements, e.g., the hood, trunk lid, or rear doors. This solves the potential problem of corrosion in these places, but in the event of damage, replacement or repair can be expensive. Other issues worth noting are leaky rear lights, also in cars after facelift. In extreme cases, this results in water collecting in the lights. The most vulnerable are cars manufactured up to 2005, then the lighting seal was improved, but this did not eliminate the problem completely. Some use such improved seals in their older Mazdas, others prefer to drill drainage holes. The biggest problem seems to be the power steering. The usual cause of failure is a leak in the coolant overflow pipe, or rather its connection to the upper part of the reservoir is leaking, which results in flooding of the power steering electrical connections. If corrosion has not yet set in, replacing the said pipe, a slightly longer element is recommended, and drying the connections may help. There's not much going on in the suspension. The front stabilizer links may rattle, and there may be corroded springs. In early Mazda RX-8s, a service campaign replaced faulty lower transverse arms on the front axle. The brakes of the Mazda RX-8 are among the reliable and effective elements. If the user is not at fault, they should work as they should, especially since this coupe is a relatively light car, so the braking system does not overwork. Of course, this remark applies to normal use. Regular track day event attendees should at least think about brake pads better adapted for this purpose, better brake fluid, or even steel braided brake lines. As for the pads themselves for this type of application, for years one of the more popular choices has been EBC yellow stuff. Many owners also praise Mintex 1144, or Hawk Performance HP Plus pads. Although the RX-8 power unit is based on the older 13B engines, many changes have been introduced, led by the renewed focus on the lack of turbocharging. Again, because before the latest generation of the Mazda RX-7 IEFD entered the market, the 13B engines were available in naturally aspirated and turbocharged versions. In addition, the location of the exhaust channels was also changed, which on the one hand was one of the procedures that allowed for a significant reduction in hydrocarbon emissions, even by half compared to the 13B RU from the RX-7FD, at the cost of the need to use a so-called water jacket. During pre-production tests, it was discovered that without a water jacket, the areas around the exhaust channels quickly become clogged with carbon, which meant that the engines were unable to work. Initially, engines were offered in versions with 4 or 6 intake channels, in English referred to as 4-port or 6-port, or simply as standard power and high power, all with a capacity of 1308 cm3, or rather, as it is usually written, 2x654 cc. On our market, the 192 and 231 horsepower versions are mainly associated. The former is precisely the 4-channel, the latter 6-channel. On the Japanese market, for the first few years of production, even a 250 horsepower version, known as Type S, was offered. There were also others, but it is not worth getting too worked up about it, because in many cases the power differed minimally, depending on the target market. Another thing is that many Mazda RX-8 units do not maintain factory parameters anyway, and the results on chassis dynamometers are sometimes poor, worse even by several dozen HP than expected. From the driver's perspective, both types of engines are very easy to distinguish. The weaker one has a program cutoff at 7,500 revolutions per minute. Maximum power is achieved at 7,200 revolutions per minute, while the more powerful one cuts off at 9,000 revolutions per minute. Maximum power at 8,500 revolutions per minute. The fact remains that if someone cares about the RX-8, they should avoid cars from the beginning of production, especially from 2003 to 2005, unless they have had their engine replaced or overhauled. The first power units not only used too little engine oil, which had a negative impact on the durability of the seals, but also had fragile ignition coils. This last feature remained with the RX-8 until the end of production. Coils, as well as spark plugs and cables, should be replaced every 50,000 kilometers at most, but if someone is unlucky, they will fail or wear out much sooner. If the annual mileage is low, the original spark plugs should be replaced every 3 years. It is worth considering better substitutes, e.g. NGK or MagnaCore. What's best? For a long time, many owners or even authorized service centers were not able to figure out that problems with engine operation were caused by worn coils, so the engines were replaced. Or no, wait. The best thing was that Mazda repaired these older engines, but the quality control was initially at such a hopeless level that the units after repair were in practice worse than brand new ones. They treated users to a whole bunch of problems, including, again, those related to ignition coils. It is estimated that almost half of the first series Mazda RX-8s have had at least one engine replacement or repair. It was rarely possible to use the engine for longer than about 160,000 kilometers. It should be mentioned that 13B units, also in the MSP version, can flood when trying to start. The manufacturer had this in mind and thought it out in such a way that it would be possible to turn the starter without feeding fuel during starting, thus emptying the combustion chambers. You can see the details in the Rev Service Workshop video below, but in short and simplified. First, we turn the starter several times with the gas pedal pressed all the way down. This cuts off the fuel supply. Then we return to a more conventional procedure. The chances of success increase if the ignition system and battery are in good condition. Thanks to the introduction of an additional oil injector and the increase in its injection pressure, the seals began to last longer. The use of a new catalytic converter also had a beneficial effect on them. It limited the phenomenon of carbon deposits collecting in the exhaust channels, which reduced the risk of overheating of the rotor side seals. Weaker versions with fewer intake channels were removed from the offer. Unfortunately, the 2008 modernization did not eliminate all the problems. The cooling system, among other things, still requires a lot of attention. A common modification is to speed up the moment when the radiator fans switch to a higher gear. In addition, many people buy better radiator replacements than the standard ones. Cooling problems are also a serious argument against adding, for example, turbocharging, although some people try anyway. sometimes with good results. It is recommended to install some sensible liquid temperature sensor inside, because the standard one first stops at 70 degrees Celsius, and then graciously moves only after exceeding 90 degrees. Sometimes it reacts even later. An open question for many people is engine lubrication. Although the manufacturer recommended 5W30 oil from the beginning, due to difficulties in selecting the right one, it is safest to simply use Mazda oil. Some claim that the first series RX-8 performs better on 10W40 oil, while the second series, thanks to changes in the lubrication system, can use 5W30. Still others, in order to reduce the engine's oil consumption, pour some two-stroke engine oil into the tank. But this is a bad idea, because it requires the removal of the catalytic converter, and this means problems during the technical inspection. The most important indicator of the engine's condition is its compression. An engine in perfect condition would give readings of 8.5 bars or slightly higher. In practice, this is rare. Results between 8 and 8.4 bars are still enjoyable. 7.5 bars is still acceptable, provided the owner takes serious care of proper operation. The lower the compression, the sooner the engine will need to be repaired or replaced. Values below 7 bars are poor information, and a unit with compression of 5 to 6 bars or lower is no longer suitable for driving. Even with a perfect ignition system, it will still be very susceptible to flooding, and performance will be severely limited. It is important to remember that, depending on the version and year, several types of starter motors were installed in Mazda RX-8s. They are interchangeable, but those used until 2005 did not spin as efficiently as later ones. This is why tables and graphs are useful for assessing whether the compression in a given engine at a given RPM is okay. You can find instructions on the measurement methodology here, for example. Depending on the year and version, there are 5- and 6-speed manual gearboxes. The former were paired with less powerful engines, and 4- and 6-speed automatics. The latter do not cause any major problems in themselves, but according to some sources, RX-8s with automatic transmissions start to suffer from engine sealing problems a bit sooner. They also have a conventional, heavy drive shaft, while vehicles with manual transmissions use shafts made of a composite material containing carbon fiber. Nevertheless, hard driving does not particularly serve the manual gearboxes of the first series cars. They are a bit too delicate, which creates the risk of problems with engaging individual gears. The durability of the gearbox was improved during the facelift. Newer cars are also worth recommending because the final drive ratio was shortened. Instead of the previous 4.444, 4.777, 1 was used, which improved the dynamics, especially when starting from a standstill. The problem is that it is also a great choice, because there is simply no direct competition of a similar nature on the market. In addition, late models are clearly better than early models, but the opinion about them is still poor due to the infant diseases of the first series cars. If anyone is unconvinced, the Mazda RX-8's advantages include good driving characteristics, even better after the facelift and in some special versions, such as the R3 or Spirit R, and an interior in which 4 adults can travel in relative comfort. But now, note, all the prices listed above are for the first series Mazda RX-8. The second series is a rarity in Europe, with one R3 model from the Japanese market on the entire mobile.de, and that of course means the steering wheel is on the right. There are facelifted RX-8s with the steering wheel on the left, but it will probably be easiest to get your hands on one in the United States. So far, the most expensive model from the second series sold on the Bring a Trailer auction platform, Grand Touring version car with a mileage of approx. 7,200 kilometers, went for $28,000 2 weeks ago. The most beautifully maintained models with slightly higher mileage can be bought for around $20,000. To put it bluntly, it's not easy. This car throws so many obstacles in your way, in various ways, that you have to be really determined to buy it. By determined, I also mean a reasonably good financial situation. It hurts a lot, because if you were to throw out all these potential problems, the Mazda RX-8 is an amazing vehicle and stands out from any other JDM. It would be half the trouble if the more successful, maybe not necessarily stylistically but technically yes, second series with an improved engine were more readily available on the old continent, but unfortunately it is not. I can only root for anyone who gets such a car, because in this way they will not only improve the visual value of the roads, but also let the surroundings listen to one of the most unusual engines in modern motoring. And if you know of any common errors, your comments are welcome.
Pro Website ist Katalog aller Automarken, Motoren, Getriebe. Was bricht und bei welchem Kilometerstand? Welche Pakete können Ihre Tasche hart belasten? Dieses und vieles mehr über Autos erfahren Sie auf Pro.